Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Facts channel. Tonight we will be drifting into the deep blue unknown. The ocean is a vast and endless expanse full of wonder and mystery. It contains ancient creatures we cannot explain, forces that quietly shape our entire planet's climate, and questions that still remain unsolved. Beneath the familiar surface lies a world of hidden valleys, crushing pressures, and darkness, so complete that light becomes a memory. This is a place where the rules of the familiar world soften and change, where strange life has found ways to thrive in conditions we once thought impossible, and where every answer opens a door to another mystery. After centuries of exploration, our understanding has deepened, yet certainty always remains just out of reach. From the earliest stirrings of life in ancient tidal pools to the silent floors of the deepest trenches, the ocean invites curiosity without ever fully revealing its hand. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is relax. Let your body soften and allow your breathing to slow, and allow the day to gently fade away as we explore the mysteries of the ocean together. Let's begin. More than 80% of the ocean has never been seen, and we still do not know what lives there. We have mapped the surface of the moon and sent probes to distant planets. Yet the floor of our own ocean remains less charted than many worlds beyond Earth. The deep sea is difficult to reach because pressure increases dramatically with depth. At the greatest depths, it crushes equipment that has not been specifically engineered to survive. Light vanishes within the first few hundred meters, and GPS signals cannot penetrate seawater, which makes navigation a constant challenge. What we have managed to see already suggests enormous variety. New species are discovered on nearly every deep-sea expedition, and entire ecosystems have been found in places once assumed to be barren. The ocean floor contains mountain ranges longer than any on land, volcanic plains, and trenches deep enough to swallow entire mountain ranges whole. Each descent returns with something that was not expected. Scientists estimate that millions of species may still be undescribed, living in pressures and temperatures that no sunlight has ever touched. That unknown fraction is not a failure science. It is an open door. Creatures in the deep ocean make their own light, and the reasons are still being studied. In the darkness below the sunlit zone, bioluminescence is not rare. It is common. More than 3/4 of the animals found in the deep sea are estimated to produce light through chemical reactions in their own bodies. Some use it to attract prey, luring smaller creatures toward them like a living lantern. Others use it to confuse predators, flashing suddenly to blind or disorient whatever is hunting them. Some may use it to communicate with members of their own species, though the language of those flashes is not well understood. The light itself can be blue, green, or red, and different species have evolved different colors that match the depths at which they live. What makes bioluminescence especially strange is how many times it seems to have evolved independently across very different animals. It is not a single invention passed down through one lineage. It is a solution that life has arrived at again and again in the dark, as though the ocean keeps asking the same question and finding the same quiet answer. Hydrothermal vents at the ocean floor support entire ecosystems that need no sunlight at all. In the 1970s, scientists lowered a submersible near the Galapagos Rift and found something that changed biology forever. Around cracks in the ocean floor, where superheated water poured out from the Earth's interior, there was life. Dense communities of tube worms, clams, shrimp, and crabs were clustered around vents in water that should have been too hot, too dark, and too chemically harsh for anything to survive. The energy driving these ecosystems does not come from the sun. It comes from chemical reactions between the vent fluids and seawater, a process called chemosynthesis. Microbes carry out those reactions and form a base of the food web, much like plants do at the surface. Tube worms can grow to enormous lengths and harbor these microbes inside their own bodies in a partnership that has no equivalent in the familiar world. The discovery of vent communities expanded the definition of where life is possible. It also raised a question that scientists still consider seriously. If life can exist without sunlight here, it may also exist in the dark. Pressurized oceans thought to lie beneath the ice of worlds like Europa and Enceladus. The ocean regulates the entire planet's climate, and it does so mostly out of sight. Currents move enormous volumes of water around the globe in a slow, interconnected system driven by differences in temperature and salt content. Warm surface water travels toward the poles, releases heat into the atmosphere, becomes cold and dense, and sinks. From there it spreads along the deep ocean floor, before eventually rising again thousands of miles away. This circulation, sometimes called a global conveyor belt, takes hundreds or even thousands of years to complete a full cycle. It distributes heat across the planet in ways that keep many regions far warmer or far cooler than their latitude alone would suggest. Without it, northern Europe would be dramatically colder, and large portions of the tropical ocean would store heat that currently gets shared elsewhere. What makes this unsettling is that the system can slow or shift. Fresh water from melting ice can interrupt the density differences that drive sinking, potentially weakening the circulation. Evidence suggests it has weakened before, with profound consequences for regional climates. We are now watching it carefully, and what we measure year to year tells us something important about how stable the planet's climate machinery truly is. The Mariana Trench is the deepest known place on Earth, and life has been found at its very bottom. Located in the western Pacific Ocean, the trench reaches a depth of nearly 11 kilometers at its lowest point, a spot known as Challenger Deep. If you place the tallest mountain on Earth at the bottom, its peak would still be submerged beneath more than 2 kilometers of water. At those depths, pressure is about 1,000 times greater than at the surface, which creates conditions that seem designed to exclude life. And yet, microorganisms thrive there in the sediment. Small crustaceans called amphipods have been collected from the deepest parts of the trench, alive and apparently adapted to the crushing weight above them. Even fish have been filmed at depths that once seemed too extreme for vertebrates. The organisms that live at such depths have proteins and cell membranes that function differently from their shallow water relatives, shaped by evolution to work under pressure rather than in spite of it. The trench also collects material from the surface, including sediment, organic particles, and unfortunately, human-made debris. The deepest place on Earth does not escape what we leave behind, and that is a quiet and sobering thought. The ocean carries sound for thousands of miles through a hidden channel, and it was once used to track submarines. Sound behaves differently in water than in air, and within the ocean it behaves differently at different depths. There is a layer of water at a particular depth where temperature and pressure combine to create conditions that bend sound inward and trap it, preventing it from escaping upward or downward. This layer is called the SOFAR channel, which stands for sound fixing and ranging. Within it, sound can travel enormous distances with very little loss of energy. A whale's call made in one part of the ocean can, under the right conditions, be detected thousands of kilometers away during the Cold War. The United States military used this channel to listen for submarines and to track underwater nuclear tests. Scientists have since used it to monitor earthquakes, study whale movements, and measure changes in ocean temperature over time, since warmer water carries sound at a slightly different speed. The ocean is not silent. It is full of sounds layered over each other, many of which are only now being cataloged and understood. Rogue waves appear without warning, and for a long time scientists were not sure they were real. Sailors had reported for centuries seeing walls of water far taller than surrounding waves, appearing suddenly out calm or rough seas with very little warning. The accounts were often dismissed because they could not be easily explained by wave physics, as it was then understood. A single wave twice or 3 times the height of those around it seemed to require conditions that were thought to be extremely rare. Then in 1995, instruments on a North Sea oil platform recorded a wave of nearly 26 meters that appeared without matching conditions. That measurement helped shift the debate. Research since then has confirmed that rogue waves are not mythological. They appear to result from complex interactions between wave trains, currents, and underwater topography that allow energy to concentrate in a single place briefly and dramatically. Open ocean is not a simple surface. It is a constantly shifting field of interacting forces, and occasionally those forces align in ways that produce something a ship might not survive. The ocean does not announce what it is capable of. It simply demonstrates it. Whale songs can travel vast distances, and their full meaning has never been decoded. Baleen whales, particularly humpback whales, produce sequences of sounds that can last for hours and follow recognizable patterns. These songs change over time. A pattern that spreads through a population this year may be replaced entirely within a few seasons, as if fashions move through the whales the way they move through human cultures. Male humpbacks are the primary singers, and the songs are often associated with breeding, but the relationship is not fully understood. Whales also produce other sounds for navigation and feeding, using echolocation like clicks to orient themselves and detect prey in dark or murky water. Sperm whales produce the loudest sound of any animal on Earth. Clicks so powerful that in theory they could stun prey at close range. Blue whales call at frequencies so low that humans cannot hear them without instruments, and those calls can propagate through hundreds or even thousands of kilometers of ocean. What all this communication means, in detail, remains largely opaque to us. We can record it, analyze its structure, and observe when it changes. But the conversation itself, whatever its content, continues in languages we have not learned to read. An entire ocean glowed green for hundreds of miles, and the cause was barely believable. The phenomenon known as the Milky Sea has been reported by sailors for centuries. Ships crossing certain parts of the Indian Ocean at night have described the water glowing with a steady, pale blue-green light as far as the eye could see in every direction. Unlike the brief flashes of bioluminescence stirred by a breaking wave, the Milky Sea is a continuous, calm illumination that can extend over enormous areas and persist for hours or even days. For a long time, it was treated as legend or exaggeration. Then in 2005, scientists used satellite imagery to confirm that a Milky Sea event covering roughly 15,000 square kilometers had been visible from space. The current leading explanation is that the glow is produced by enormous concentrations of bioluminescent bacteria growing on the surface of algae or organic matter. But what triggers a bloom of that scale in a specific location, and why these events appear in certain regions and not others, is still not well understood. The ocean keeps producing phenomena large enough to be seen from orbit that still do not have complete explanations. The ocean floor has rivers and waterfalls that flow invisibly beneath the surface. Dense, cold, salty water behaves differently from the warm, lighter water above it. When conditions are right, this denser water flows along the ocean floor in concentrated streams that have been mapped and studied like rivers on land. Some of these underwater rivers follow channels carved into the seafloor. Others cascade down the edges of underwater continental shelves in waterfalls that dwarf anything on the surface of the planet. The Denmark Strait Cataract, located between Greenland and Iceland, carries more water than all the rivers on Earth combined as it plunges down the seafloor. These density-driven flows are not just curiosities. They are part of the same circulation system that moves heat around the globe, carrying cold, oxygen-rich water into the deep ocean and helping sustain life in places far from where that oxygen was produced. The boundaries between water masses of different temperature and salinity can be sharp enough that they act almost like interfaces between different liquids. The ocean is not a single body of water mixing freely. It is a system of layered flows, each following its own path through the dark. The ocean produces roughly half of the oxygen in every breath you take, and most of it comes from organisms you cannot see. Phytoplankton are microscopic, single-celled organisms that drift in the sunlit upper layers of the ocean. Through photosynthesis, they absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen, much like plants on land. Because there are so many of them covering such an enormous area, their combined contribution to global oxygen production is comparable to that of all the forests and grasslands on land combined. The ocean also absorbs enormous quantities of carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere, which slows the accumulation of greenhouse gases. Phytoplankton populations shift with ocean temperature, nutrient availability, and mixing from currents. Some regions produce dense blooms visible from satellites as swirling green and blue patterns on the ocean surface. Others are relatively barren biological deserts where nutrient-poor water supports little life. The health of this invisible workforce matters enormously. Changes in phytoplankton distribution and abundance affect not just ocean ecosystems, but the chemistry of the entire atmosphere. We depend on something we rarely think about and have never seen with the naked eye, drifting quietly at the top of the sea. The giant squid remained almost entirely unknown until quite recently, and what we know still surprises scientists. For most of human history, the giant squid existed largely as legend. Tentacles wash ashore occasionally, or pieces appear in the stomachs of sperm whales, confirming that something very large lived in the deep ocean. But a living giant squid in its natural habitat was never photographed until 2004. when a Japanese research team finally captured images of one at depth. Even now, encounters are extremely rare. Giant squid can reach lengths of up to 13 meters, making them among the largest invertebrates on Earth. Their eyes are the largest of any living animal, estimated to reach the size of a dinner plate. An adaptation thought to help them detect the faint bioluminescent flashes of approaching sperm whales in total darkness. They are not simply large. They are built for a life of deep-sea hunting and deep-sea survival in ways that remain poorly understood because we have almost never observed them alive and active. The ocean conceals animals of extraordinary size as easily as it conceals anything else. Scale offers no protection from invisibility in the deep. Octopuses show a kind of intelligence that seems to have evolved along a completely different path from our own. They have large brains relative to their body size, can solve puzzles, open jars, navigate mazes, and appear to remember solutions to problems they encountered before. Some have been observed using tools, carrying coconut shells for later use as shelter. They can change not just the color but the texture of their skin in a fraction of a second, mimicking the surface of rock or coral with precision that is almost unsettling to watch. They can squeeze through openings barely larger than their own because they have no rigid skeleton. They are also largely solitary and short-lived, which makes their intelligence harder to explain through social pressures. The way primate intelligence is often explained. Most octopuses live less than 2 years. They do not have the long learning periods or the extended social structures that we associate with intelligence in mammals or birds. Yet they demonstrate behaviors that suggest awareness, planning, and something that at least resembles curiosity. Their nervous system is distributed, with most of their neurons residing in their arms rather than their central brain. They think, if thinking is the right word, in a way that is genuinely alien to us. Every night, billions of deep-sea creatures rise toward the surface in the largest migration on Earth, then sink again before dawn. This daily vertical migration involves an enormous variety of animals, including fish, squid, shrimp, and countless smaller organisms. During the day, they rest in cold, dark water hundreds of meters below the surface, where they are harder for predators to see and where their metabolism slows in the cold. At dusk, they begin rising to feed in the richer, warmer waters near the surface, where phytoplankton and small prey are more abundant. Before sunrise, they descend again. The scale of this movement is difficult to comprehend. It happens simultaneously across every ocean on the planet, every single night. Early sonar equipment sometimes returned mysterious readings from what appeared to be a false bottom that moved up and down with the light. Scientists eventually realized they were detecting the collective density of this migration. The animals involved carry carbon downward as they descend, helping transport material from the sunlit surface to the deep. This daily commute shapes ocean chemistry and energy flow in ways that scientists are still working to fully measure and understand. Methane seeps on the ocean floor support communities of life that should not exist by any simple expectation. In certain parts of the ocean floor, coal methane and hydrogen sulfide seep slowly up through cracks in the sediment from reserves buried beneath. These chemicals are toxic to most life. Yet around these seeps, scientists have found dense communities thriving in the cold and dark. Mats of microbes cover the sediment, extracting energy from the methane through a process that does not require oxygen. Clams, mussels, tube worms, and other animals cluster nearby, many of them hosting symbiotic microbes in their tissues that do the chemical work for them. Some of these communities are anchored to structures called methane ice or methane hydrate, where the gas is frozen into a crystalline form by the combination of cold temperature and high pressure. If you brought a piece of methane hydrate to the surface, it would begin releasing gas and could even be lit on fire, a substance that looks like ice but burns. The seeps can persist for thousands of years, and the communities around them develop slowly, making them among the most stable deep-sea ecosystems we have found. Life has filled almost every chemical niche the ocean offers. Worms have been found eating the bones of whale skeletons on the seafloor, and they were only discovered in the early 2000s. When a whale dies and its body sinks to the ocean floor, it creates what scientists call a whale fall, a sudden arrival of enormous organic material in an otherwise sparse environment. The carcass passes through a series of ecological stages, each dominated by different organisms, as different parts of the whale are consumed. In the final stage, after the soft tissue and oils have been stripped away, the bones themselves become a resource. A type of worm called ostax, which means bone devourer in Latin, sends root-like structures into the bone to extract the lipids locked inside. Ostax has no mouth and no stomach in conventional sense. The digestion happens inside tissues that penetrate the bone directly. What makes these worms additionally strange is that the visible worm on the bone surface is female, and the males are tiny microscopic creatures living inside her body in large numbers. Whale falls are not just a resource. They are ecosystems that can support dozens of species for years or even decades, creating temporary islands of life on an otherwise empty floor. Ostax is a reminder that the ocean finds uses for everything eventually. A sound was recorded in the deep ocean in 1997 that was unlike anything scientists could immediately identify. Hydrophones, originally placed in the ocean by the military to monitor submarine activity, picked up a signal of enormous power. It rose in frequency over about 1 minute, and its amplitude was strong enough to be detected by sensors more than 5,000 kilometers apart. Scientists at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration called it the bloop. Its characteristics match biological sounds in some ways, but no known animal was thought to be large enough to produce something of that intensity. For years, it generated speculation about unknown creatures in the deep. The leading scientific explanation now is that it was the sound of a large ice quake, the fracturing and calving of a massive Antarctic ice sheet, producing a sound with some similarities to biological calls. But the original uncertainty was genuine and not trivial. The ocean is full of sounds, and our catalog of what produces them is still incomplete. Sounds are recorded regularly that do not match any identified source. The deep ocean is not just a visual unknown. It is an acoustic one, too, and new instruments continue to find things that require explanation. We have mapped Mars more thoroughly than we have mapped the floor of our own ocean. Satellites equipped with radar can peer through clouds and map planetary surfaces in detail, but they cannot see through ocean water. Mapping the ocean floor requires ships or submersibles to gather data slowly and in sections, which means full high-resolution coverage of the entire seafloor has never been achieved. Current maps of the global ocean floor are assembled from a patchwork of surveyed data, acoustic measurements, and inferences from satellite gravity readings, which suggest the broad shape of underwater features without resolving their fine detail. Large seamounts, entire mountain ranges, and wide plains remain poorly characterized. Explorers looking at ocean floor maps are sometimes looking at images with resolutions that would make a mountain look like a smooth bump. In contrast, missions to Mars and the Moon have produced detailed topographic maps using orbital instruments that work easily without an ocean in the way. This asymmetry means that we are in some ways better acquainted with the surfaces of other worlds than with the floor of our own. It is a strange reminder that proximity does not guarantee familiarity, and that the hardest places to study are sometimes the ones closest to home. Sharks can sense the electric fields generated by the bodies of other animals, and this sense has no direct equivalent in humans. All living muscles and nerves generate small electrical signals as they function, and in water these signals spread outward as weak electric fields. Sharks have organs called the ampullae of Lorenzini, small jelly-filled pores arranged across their snouts that can detect these fields with extraordinary sensitivity. They can perceive voltage differences smaller than 1/billionth of a volt per centimeter, a level of sensitivity that allows them to detect a buried flatfish from a short distance, even when every other sense is blocked. Some sharks and rays may also use this sense to navigate by detecting the weak electric fields produced by ocean currents moving through the Earth's magnetic field. This would give them a kind of biological compass calibrated to the planet itself. Migratory sharks have been observed returning to the same location year after year over thousands of kilometers, suggesting navigational abilities that cannot be fully explained by smell or memory of currents alone. The ocean has shaped animals with senses so refined they exceed anything we have built into our most sensitive instruments. The shark is not just a predator. It is a detection system that has been refined over hundreds of millions of years. The ocean absorbs a vast majority of the excess heat produced by climate change, and has been doing so quietly for decades. When scientists measure global temperature, the atmosphere is only part of the story. The ocean has taken up more than 90% of the additional heat that has accumulated in the Earth's climate system since industrialization began. This has slowed surface warming compared to what would otherwise be, but it has not been without consequences. warmer ocean water expands, contributing to rising sea levels. It also affects the formation of hurricanes, which draw their energy from warm surface water. Deeper layers of the ocean are warming too, just more slowly, and that stored heat will continue influencing the climate for generations even if surface conditions change. The ocean is also absorbing large quantities of carbon dioxide, which is changing its chemistry. When carbon dioxide dissolves in seawater, it forms carbonic acid, making the ocean more acidic. This process, called ocean acidification, affects the ability of shellfish, corals, and other organisms to build their calcium-based shells and skeletons. The ocean has been absorbing consequences for us without any announcement, and the effects of what it has taken and are still working their way through every level of the marine ecosystem. Coral reefs cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, yet they support roughly a quarter of all marine species. They are built by tiny animals called coral polyps, which secrete calcium carbonate structures around themselves over many years. The accumulated architecture of countless generations creates the complex three-dimensional environments that so many other species depend on for shelter, breeding, and feeding. Reefs have been growing and evolving for hundreds of millions of years, and the diversity they support reflects that deep history. A single reef can contain thousands of species of fish, invertebrates, algae, and microorganisms, many of which cannot survive anywhere else. Yet despite their age and resilience, reefs are vulnerable to rapid change. Higher water temperatures cause coral to expel the symbiotic algae living inside their tissues, producing bleaching. Without those algae, the coral starves. Some bleaching events are temporary, and corals recover. Others are severe enough to kill vast sections of reef. Reefs also face threats from ocean acidification, coastal runoff, and physical damage. They are among the most productive ecosystems on the planet, and also among the most threatened, holding an enormous fraction of marine biodiversity in structures that took millennia to build and can be lost in a single season. The Sargasso Sea is an ocean with no coastline, defined entirely by surrounding currents. Located in the North Atlantic, it is the only sea on Earth bounded not by land but by 4 ocean currents that swirl around it and keep its waters relatively still and distinct. Within those boundaries, vast quantities of floating sargassum, seaweed drift on the surface, forming dense mats that serve as habitat for a remarkable collection of organisms. Eels from rivers across North America and Europe travel thousands of kilometers to breed in the Sargasso Sea, and their larvae drift back on ocean currents to the rivers where their parents originated. The journey is extraordinary, and the mechanism by which eels navigate it is not fully understood. Sea turtles also gather in the Sargasso, and loggerhead turtles spend the early years of their life drifting within the floating seaweed mats, sheltered and feeding before maturing enough to return to coastal waters. The Sargasso is calm, warm, and famously clear, sometimes called the golden floating rainforest for the life concentrated in its drifting vegetation. It exists as a reminder that the ocean organizes itself in ways that do not always align with the categories we use to describe it. Underwater caves and blue holes hold water that has not moved for thousands of years, and the conditions inside preserve ancient records. Blue holes are vertical underwater caves that open at the ocean floor or coastline, descending deep into limestone formations that were carved by rain and rivers during ice ages when sea levels were much lower. When the ice melted and seas rose, the cave systems flooded. In the deep, still layers below the halocline, where fresh and salt water meet, oxygen is virtually absent. Without oxygen, bacterial decomposition slows nearly to a stop, and organic material can be preserved in extraordinary detail. Sediment layers in blue holes record hurricanes, floods, and climate events stretching back thousands of years of precise, undisturbed archives. Bones of extinct animals, wood from ancient forests, and pollen from plants that no longer grow nearby have all been recovered from their depths. The Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico has an especially vast system of flooded caves called cenotes, connected over enormous distances and holding artifacts of ancient human habitation in their clear, still water. These places are simultaneously geological archives, archaeological sites, and ecosystems shaped by extreme chemical conditions. They sit just below the surface of the sea, holding a silence that feels like a kind of memory. The chemistry of early Earth may have been modeled at hydrothermal vents, and the ocean may hold clues about the origin of life itself. Life as we understand it requires certain chemical conditions, energy gradients, and protected environments where complex molecules can form and accumulate without being immediately destroyed. Hydrothermal vents, both the high-temperature black smokers and the cooler alkaline vents, provide energy, mineral surfaces, and chemical gradients in a way that some researchers believe mirrors what may have been needed to get the first self-replicating molecules started. Alkaline vents in particular create natural proton gradients across thin mineral membranes, and proton gradients are precisely what the most fundamental energy-producing process in living cells depends on. Some scientists argue that life did not begin in a warm pond on land, but in an ancient version of these deep-sea systems, shielded from surface radiation and bathed in the chemical ingredients that cells still use today. The debate about the origin of life is unresolved and probably will remain so for a long time, because the evidence is indirect and ancient. But the ocean keeps offering candidates, and each new vent system discovered adds another piece to the puzzle that is also, in a deep sense, the story of what we are. Submarine volcanoes shape the ocean floor constantly, and most volcanic activity on Earth happens underwater. The mid-ocean ridge system, where tectonic plates pull apart and new seafloor is created, is the longest mountain range on Earth and almost entirely submerged. Magma wells up to the gap, cools, and forms new rock, pushing older seafloor outward in both directions. This process, called seafloor spreading, has been occurring for billions of years and is responsible for the arrangement of the continents. Where plates collide and one dives beneath the other, deep-sea trenches form, and volcanic arcs can grow into island chains. Individual submarine volcanoes called seamounts rise from the ocean floor by the thousands, and many of them have never been visited. Some grow tall enough to become islands, spend millions of years eroding back into the sea, and leave behind flat-topped underwater mountains called geos as their only record. The ocean floor is not an old, static surface. It is the youngest part of Earth's crust, constantly being recycled in a slow planetary cycle. The oldest ocean floor is only about 200 million years old, a fraction of the age of the continents. Because the ocean erases itself and begins again, sediment on the ocean floor holds a continuous climate, records stretching back millions of years, written in the shells of microscopic creatures. As tiny organisms called foraminifera live and die in the ocean, their shells drift down and accumulate in layers on the seafloor. The chemistry of those shells reflects the temperature and chemistry of the water at the time the organism lived. By drilling cores from the ocean sediment, scientists can extract samples from different depths, each representing a different time in the past, and read changes in ocean temperature, ice volume, and atmospheric carbon dioxide stretching back tens of millions of years. Ice ages, warm periods, sudden shifts in climate, and the slow drift of continents all leave signatures in the sediment. Some layers contain specific markers like sudden changes in species composition or chemical anomalies that correspond to known events such as mass extinctions or large volcanic eruptions. The ocean floor is in this sense a library, and the books are made of chalk and clay deposited grain by grain over geological time. We have only read a small fraction of what is stored down there, and each new core sample adds chapters to a planetary story that is still being assembled. The magnetic stripes on the ocean floor were one of the most important pieces of evidence that the theory of plate tectonics was correct. As magma rises at mid-ocean ridges and cools into new rock, it preserves a record of Earth's magnetic field at the moment it solidified. Earth's magnetic field reverses its polarity occasionally over geological time, so the ocean floor records these reversals as alternating bands of normally magnetized and reversely magnetized rock, symmetrically arranged on either side of the ridge. When scientists first mapped these stripes in the 1950s and 60s, they found that the pattern matched on both sides of the ridge as a mirror image, confirming that new seafloor was being created at the center and spreading outward. This was the key evidence that settled decades of debate about whether continents could move. The seafloor was not passive. It was being manufactured and consumed in a planetary scale conveyor. The reversals themselves remain imperfectly understood. Scientists know they happen irregularly, taking thousands of years to complete, and that during a reversal the field weakens and becomes complex before settling into its new orientation. The ocean floor carries this whole geological autobiography in its magnetic texture, mostly unread beneath kilometers of water. Ocean acidification is changing the chemistry of the sea quietly and at a rate that has few natural precedents in the geological record. Since the industrial era began, the ocean has absorbed roughly a quarter of all the carbon dioxide released by human activity. While this has reduced the amount of warming in the atmosphere, it has changed the pH of seawater measurably. The ocean has become about 30% more acidic than it was before industrialization, a change that may sound small, but has large consequences for organisms that build structures from calcium carbonate. Oysters, clams, sea urchins, starfish, and corals all depend on calcium carbonate for their shells or skeletons. As the water becomes more acidic, it becomes harder for these organisms to build those structures, and in some cases, existing structures begin to dissolve. Young oysters in some areas of the Pacific Northwest have already experienced growth failures linked to acidified water reaching their hatcheries. The effects ripple through food webs because many of the affected organisms are foundational to the ecosystems around them. Geological records suggest the ocean has been this acidic before, but the previous changes happen over much longer periods, allowing life time to adapt. The current change is happening faster than anything in at least the last 56 million years. Deep ocean currents travel so slowly that water at the bottom of the ocean may not have seen the surface in over 1,000 years. When water sinks to the deep ocean in polar regions, it begins a journey that is almost incomprehensibly slow, moving at rates of only centimeters per second. Deep water masses travel along the ocean floor for centuries before eventually upwelling in distant regions. By the time this water reaches the surface again, the climate conditions under which it sank may have been completely different, and the civilizations that existed when it last touched the air have long since disappeared. The age of deep ocean water can be measured by analyzing the ratios of radioactive isotopes it contains, using the same principles that allow scientists to date ancient organic material. Water sampled from the deepest parts of the Pacific has been dated to more than 1,000 years since it last contacted the atmosphere. That water carries chemical memories of a different era. Its oxygen content, carbon chemistry, and temperature were set under conditions that no longer exist at the surface. In a way, the deep ocean is a time capsule made of water, carrying the past quietly to the present on its slow journey back toward the light. Some sounds recorded in the ocean have never been matched to any identified source, and the deep water remains an active area of acoustic research. Hydrophones distributed across the ocean have been recording for decades, and the catalog of sounds they have gathered is still being analyzed. Many are familiar. Whales, earthquakes, shipping traffic, and ice form a background of identifiable noise. But among those recordings are sounds that do not match any known biological or geological source. Some repeat in patterns that suggest a biological origin, but do not match any known species. Others have been recorded in regions where the nearest shipping lane or research vessel was hundreds of kilometers away. The deep ocean is not accessible for casual investigation, which means that when an unusual sound is detected, confirming its source can require organizing a dedicated expedition. In the meantime, the sound sits in the archive, cataloged and waiting. The SOFAR channel's ability to carry signals over vast distances means that a sound made in the South Pacific might be recorded on equipment in the North Atlantic, making geographic attribution additionally difficult. The ocean keeps its acoustic mysteries as carefully as it keeps everything else. Some of its sounds remain without an owner. The deep ocean may harbor life forms that do not fit easily into any category we currently use, and the definitions of life itself have been tested by what the ocean contains. Viruses in the ocean outnumber all other biological entities by a factor that is difficult to conceptualize. There may be 10 million virus particles in every milliliter of seawater, and they play active roles in ocean chemistry by infecting and destroying microbial cells and releasing their contents back into the water. Beyond viruses, the ocean sediment contains microorganisms living in conditions so extreme, at such depth, under such pressure, and on such limited energy, that their metabolism has been measured in geological time. Some microorganisms in deep seafloor sediment appear to be surviving on an amount of energy so small that each individual cell may divide only once every few thousand years. They are alive by definition because they maintain themselves and occasionally reproduce. But the activity of living looks almost entirely different from anything that the word suggests in ordinary conversation. The boundary between living and not living becomes genuinely unclear when pressed to these extremes, and the ocean is where the question gets pressed hardest. Every expedition to the deep comes back with something that makes the familiar categories of biology feel a little smaller than they were before. And through it all, the deepest mysteries stay close. The ocean covers more than 70% of this planet, and yet remains largely unknown. We drifted past the invisible forests of phytoplankton-breathing life into the air we take for granted. We listen to whale songs carry across thousands of kilometers of dark water, their meaning still somewhere beyond our reach. We descended past a point where light gives out and found life thriving around cracks in the earth where the water boils and the chemistry burns. We visited the ocean floor's ancient sediment libraries, the silent migration happening every night beneath every sea, and the strange electric world that sharks navigate with senses we cannot share. We floated over magnetic stripes that record a planetary autobiography and found worms eating bones in the dark and squid the size of buses hiding in a world we have barely entered. And through it all, the biggest mystery stayed close. The ocean covers most of this world. It regulates the air. It holds the history of life. And more than 4 out of every 5 parts of it have never been seen by human eyes. It keeps offering clues. It never rushes. And it never tells the full story at once. If you enjoyed this sleepy voyage, you could support the channel by liking, subscribing, or leaving a calm little comment before you rest. It helps more curious minds find their way here. And if you are still awake, there is another video waiting on your screen, ready to carry you onward into another corner of science. But for now, let the questions loosen their grip. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. Allow your breathing to slow, steady, and deepen. Picture the surface of the ocean at night, dark and glittering and patient, with every wave a slow, quiet exhale. You do not need answers tonight. You only need rest. Sleep well and good night.